You're watching The Breakfast Club.
Yep, it's the world's most dangerous morning show, The Breakfast Club. Charlamagne the God, Angela Yee. We got a special guest in the building, an author, the author of the new book. What's the name of the book?
She Begat This.
She Begat This. Begat This. I was about to say begat this. Begat this. Joan Morgan is here. Good morning.
Good morning.
How are you?
I'm great. I'm happy to be here.
We're excited to have you. 20 years from the Miseducation of Lauryn Hill. So this was important to you to talk about this album and Lauryn Hill in particular.
Yes.
And let's discuss why. And let's not forget who Joan Morgan is also. Fill the people in on hip-hop feminism and the book that you wrote prior to this.
My first book is called When Chicken Heads Come Home to Roost.
Hilarious.
Yes.
A hip-hop feminist breaks it down. Mm-hmm. And I coined the term hip-hop feminism in it. And now you can get a PhD in hip-hop feminism. Hip-hop feminism is taught all over the world at this point.
Got to be very tough to be a feminist in hip hop because
it was really hard.
It is a culture that is very misogynistic, chauvinistic, has degraded and disrespected women for a long time.
Yeah. And it's done a lot of other things too. So it was about finding that balance, about loving the music and the culture and really loving us as women and as Black people.
Is there a balance?
There's definitely a balance to strike. You know what I mean? I feel like the culture only gets better if there are people who are willing to hold it accountable and talk about the problems. So
and for people like my age to say what we were doing was wrong and to acknowledge that.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
It's so hard to be a fan of hip hop sometimes and be a woman.
So hard.
You know, and to explain why we like the songs that we like, but then we know it's like, how can I even listen to this and sing along to it when it is something that is degrading to me?
You know, I always say women are also human. Like, you may not like something lyrically, but music moves, production moves, good beats move. And so it's important to acknowledge that part of you, but still be able to say, okay, but, you know, lyrically, this is really questionable and have a conversation about it.
Yeah, and I think we should be able to have a conversation. Like I saw yesterday that the Dr. Dre biopic is getting taken off Apple because of heavy orgy scenes, drugs, and guns. And I'm like, that was 90s hip-hop, though.
Word.
Like, how can you not tell a Dr. Dre biopic without that stuff in it?
But I guess Apple's trying to keep it, like, for some reason, really clean with all of their content.
Nah, I think they're worried about this climate. You know what I mean? But I think that I think we can get to a better understanding even in this climate if we acknowledge the wrong that was happening back then.
We don't get to a better place by erasing facts from the past.
Yes.
We just don't. You know, we have to put it into its historical context, deal with it, say what we've learned, discuss what we still need to learn. But you can't change history by just erasing it. It's a dangerous move.
Mm-hmm.
You know?
Well, I mean, he could put it somewhere else. I guess Apple's just not putting it there. So what about Lauryn Hill and the Miseducation of Lauryn Hill made you feel compelled to write this book, She Begat This?
Well, Atria approached me about it, and when I take on a writing project, I really only take on a long writing project if I feel like no one else is going to write it the way I'm going to write it. Mm-hmm. And I felt that about this book. Generally, when we get books about albums, they're really music nerd approaches, you know, like it's music journalists like myself, and we want to go back in and we want to talk about what the producer was doing in the studio with this cut was happening. And I had no interest in talking about her like that at all. The album drops in 1998. We still had albums. You know, at that point, we were still buying something and playing it on something. And we're in 2018. Everything about our world has changed. It's the end of the 20th century, and we're 18 years into the 21st. She dropped an album that sold like 19 million records, and it with no social media, no Instagram. Like if you were in a relationship, you didn't text. You were waiting for, you know, if someone didn't show up, you had to put a quarter in a payphone and try and track them down somewhere.
Wow.
So it's a love album that takes place at a really different time. We still like the Clintons in the 90s. Now we know that the Clintons had really dangerous policies for us as Black people, but particularly for Black love. And I just wanted a chance to talk about all of that.
Yeah, full disclosure, I hate X Factor. And the reason I hate X Factor,
I love that song. That's
and I write about this in my first book. My mom used to play that song over and over in her room. And back in the day, I thought, oh, my mom's cool. She's listening to Lauryn Hill. But that's when she was getting divorced from my father.
Ah, okay. So it
now,
brings up memories. Yeah.
So now all those memories are memories of pain for me.
Yeah.
So I tend to take that out on Lauryn Hill for no reason whatsoever.
Well, yeah, but it got your mom through though.
It did. It
Music
did. I just really I turned that song and it's something I realized in therapy though. Like man, I don't like this song because I realized why my mom was really listening to it. For whatever reason, that song embodies the pain my mom was going through.
Can I just say I love that you talk so freely about therapy. It's really, I admire it so much. And I want to say that on the air because I think we don't talk about it enough in the community. So
thank you.
Now, let's talk about what Lauryn Hill represents for us, though. There's a lot of things that you wrote in this book that I never even put together the way you've put it together. Just even starting from Lauryn Hill being in the Fugees, right?
Right.
And being in this group and being the standout person, the first person that we were like, we want her to have a solo album.
For sure.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I think that for me, there are a lot of great singers in the world. I take nothing away from her as a singer, but as an MC, bar none, we had just not seen anything like her in terms of the embodiments of a female MC. But just as an MC, I think she holds her own amongst anybody. So I think that there was always this excitement about when is she going to do her own thing? When is she going to do her own thing? And then it was coupled with, you know, the trying to figure out what was going on within the Fugees, within her relationship with Wyclef. And so when the first track that we heard, which is not the first single, Lost Ones, hit the streets, it was like I mean, everybody kind of remembers where they were, what they were doing, the way they reacted to it.
The way the song even
the way the
started.
Song invested about it, you know. And so there's that musically, but it's also just that album was a culture shifter. So when you look back, I call her as much of a visual intervention as a musical one. When you look back to like, you know, now it's nothing to see Gucci models and teeny weeny little afros or Yves Saint Laurent models with cornrows without extensions, like the blackety black cornrows. And you didn't have that in 98. There was no natural hair movement. Like when I used to go in Brooklyn and ask a barber to like cut my hair into a Caesar like this, I used to have to talk them through it. Like they did not want to do it.
You have an immaculate fade, by the way.
Amazing.
Thank you.
Incredible.
And what's interesting, you talk about Essence magazine versus Vogue magazine,
right?
And how they both could have over a million viewers, readers,
right?
But Essence is not going to get the same amount of dollars that Vogue magazine would get for advertising.
Absolutely. I mean, if you just look at compare any issue of Essence to any issue of Vogue, Vogue is always thicker. And that's because those luxury brands, even though, I mean, the 90s is like ghetto fabulous. So the 90s is the year, like if you go into Gucci's accessories department, there's tons of Black girls and Latino girls in there, Latino girls, and we don't get that acknowledgement in terms of Black advertising and Black media at all. So it's a completely different era. So when you see a Lauryn Hill on the cover of Harper's Bazaar, you're like, whoa, because Harper's is like the whitest magazine possible, like lily white, like not even Black models really.
And Lauryn was black, not even just her aesthetic, but the music. Lauryn never sold out. She never made anything like commercially appealing, like trying to make something commercially appealing. It just became commercially appealing.
She was on the cover of Time magazine.
Time magazine. I mean, we didn't even really put Black women with locks on the cover of Essence at that point.
She was, so you started Honey magazine.
I didn't start Honey magazine.
You were around at the beginning of Honey?
I'm in the first issue of
Okay,
Honey.
you're in the first issue, and Lauryn was on the cover of that first issue.
Yeah,
right?
That's Kierna Mayo and Joycelyn Dingle. And that cover now is iconic. Like if you go through Tumblr, if you Google her image, that's one of the top ones to come up. But I think that women who looked like her, who were dark-skinned, natural hair, had never really seen themselves represented that way in mainstream. I mean, like it's akin to what Beyonce is now to people.
What do you think happened to Lauryn Hill? Like, what made her not want to put out any more music?
You know, that's the big mystery. I mean, I think a lot of things happen to her that we know are fact, that we don't have to assume. So I know I'm a mom. I have one kid. My last book is exactly the same, came out the exact same age as my son, which is 19 years, because being a mother and being a creative person is a difficult balance.
Very true. She
has 6 kids. We know that she had a very high-profile legal battle about two. One was less high-profile than the other, about who the actual production credit goes to. And she also had, she was in prison for tax evasion. So all of those things are really, really factual, heavy things. I do hear from people who are close to her that she's never stopped writing. She's never stopped making music. And if she wanted to, she could drop several albums tomorrow. But why she hasn't, I don't know.
And let's talk about that, because you do discuss her having a baby and how people weighed in on that and felt like this is a critical time in your career, right? And she has a baby at that time, and some people felt like, what an awful time.
What bad timing, right?
What bad timing for having a child.
So, you know, I think the important thing for us to remember now that Lauryn Hill was like 23 years old when we fell in love with her as a solo artist. And I think that we put a lot of things on her shoulders. So part of it, I think, is that she was the good girl rapper. She was Ivy League educated. She was smart. She was all of these things. And so there was a certain respectability politics that didn't want her to be pregnant, and people didn't know who the father was.
Right.
But even more than that, I mean, like, just to be very real, corporations don't treat women having children the same way they do when men are expecting children.
Yeah.
And so it was quite realistic for people to be concerned about how that would affect her career, because there's mad precedent for that 20 years ago and now, that women get put on a very different track when they have children.
It kind of reminds me of how people were critical of Cardi B.
Absolutely.
When she was having a baby. But, you know, I think as a woman, you're right, it is different, but why should you put off what you want to do with your own personal life for your career? We shouldn't have to do that.
Right. Well, we also don't have a right to tell women what to do with their bodies. You know what I mean?
100%.
You know,
That's being very selfish.
Like, you can't tell someone what a terrible time to have a baby.
Right.
Like, if you decide you want to do that, that's your thing.
And quite frankly, I mean, going back and doing the research through this, a lot of people were pregnant in 98, 99, myself included. I was like, wow, everybody was having a baby.
And this is the obvious thing to say, but the kid means more to you 20 years later,
right?
Than whatever it was you were doing.
Whatever it is you were doing at the time, the kid is more important. And also, you know, it's a fallacy that babies come at perfect times.
Right.
They don't. Pretty much everyone I interviewed talked about, like, yeah, it was probably not the best time. I mean, I was about to go out on book tour, and my agent and my publisher were like, "You're pregnant and you're on bed rest and you can't tour? What? Really? Is this what we're doing?" So children don't necessarily come at the best time either. The relationship is not in the right place, or you're in a great relationship and you want more time with the person that you are. They kind of come on their own schedule. And you work it out, you know, and clearly she has several times.
Do you think that Lauryn maybe raised the bar too high for herself? Like, when you come out with such a great body of work like the Miseducation and Lauryn Hill, you're like, all right, you know what? I'm just going to bow out here. We're good.
You know what, Charlamagne? I think we raised that bar too high. You know, I think that we gave her a lot of labels like goddess. I've heard people call her priestess, and that we didn't really account for her humanity in certain ways. So we know that the album comes out of the heartbreak of a very difficult love triangle, right? Like, Wyclef has certainly written about that. Lauryn has made the album her statement about that. I didn't really want to go too much into that in the book because I think the album's bigger than that. But she was really working out some messy stuff, right? And so for people to put the burden on her of, like, you're the savior of hip hop, you know, you are the role model for Black female humanity, is a lot to put on a 23-year-old girl's shoulder. And did she buy into some of that? Maybe. But I would imagine that if you do, it would make it very difficult to put out another record if that's not how you're feeling. You know what I mean? If that's not the representation that you want to carry for other people in the world.
I thought about this just now. If all of this would have happened during the social media era, I wonder would it have been better or worse for her? Because I say better because she'd have known she had a tribe.
Right.
Like, it would have been a bunch of women online saying it's not her fault, like, you know, that she got caught into this triangle. Like, she would have known somebody had her back.
Right.
Maybe she felt like nobody had her back then.
Yeah, you know, I feel like I think that that's very, very true. I also think that there's no way that the identity of her child's father would have stayed secret in the same way that it did for as long. So I think that the era came out and gave her some privacy. But I do wonder if she knows, you know, I was on tour for the day that the album dropped, the actual 20th anniversary. And it just made me sad that she wasn't out engaging with her public, even in the way that I am, because there's so much love for her. And I wonder if she knows that, if she knows how much people still truly, I mean, I think the criticism is louder always than the praise. But I do wonder if she knows, like, there are entire Tumblrs and Pinterests dedicated to like Lauryn. Yeah.
And I think about the business aspect of it too, for her being so young and, you know, first being with the Fugees, right? And then having that breakup.
Right.
And that's difficult already because of how things broke up. And like you said, the love triangle and what she was going through with Wyclef, who she was with every day on the road, in the studio.
Absolutely.
And then to have that end. And then get into a legal situation over her album as well.
Right.
That was very costly. That can be such a burden on your whole spirit.
Right.
Like your whole beginning of this music career, just going from the Fugees to going to your solo album to going through these lawsuits to having to be, you know, stuck at the label and have to pay all this money. And then, you know, that's a lot to put on somebody.
It's a lot. And I think it also speaks to what you said before. I always tell people, I refer to her as Lauryn or L Boogie in the book. And I use that because that's what she referred. That's how we talked about her at that time. That album, Miseducation, was created obviously by someone who was very vulnerable and very open. I think when we see this incarnation of Ms. Hill later, that's a very different person. That's a person who's gone through exactly the things that you just mentioned, and is not quite as open to the world. So I think when people want another Miseducation, I don't know that Ms. Hill is capable of giving us another Miseducation. I think that's an L Boogie product, you know?
What do you think the Miseducation of Lauryn Hill is now? Not the album, but just in general. Like when people discuss Lauryn Hill, what are they miseducated on?
What are they miseducated about? I think that they are miseducated about the ability of one woman to save a genre or even the responsibility. I think people confuse being disappointed with the fact that you don't have a second album, because I don't count Unplugged as the second album, and being entitled to it. Like, you know, you feel like you're entitled to this work from her. And I mean, we could be disappointed that we don't have it, but you're not entitled. Like, she doesn't have to show up and to continue to produce music for us in the way that we would like.
She don't owe us anything.
I think that she owed... I think there's an accountability to your audience in terms of tour, how you perform, whether you show up on time.
Right.
Like, I do think that, you know, we
letting
all
the
have
people know that's opening for you that they're not going to be on the tour anymore.
all of that. I think is fair game. You know what I mean?
When you had to turn the book into the publisher, did you do it late on purpose? Like whenever the due date was, did you do it? Did you turn it in late just because?
Well, I want to say this book was late, but in my defense, I had 4 months to write it, and I took 4 months and 3 weeks. And 4 months is a very short time to write a book.
Not
It's
bad.
only right though. It's only right though, right? It's Lauryn.
Now, do you have a personal relationship with Lauryn at all?
I don't. I interviewed her for a cover story for Essence in, I want to say, is that 2008? Because that's the rumored Fuji reunion album that never happened. Yeah.
How was that interview?
It was difficult. It took weeks for us to meet, actually. Some of the same stuff we're talking about now. And when we sat down, what I had to quickly adjust to was that this was not L Boogie that was sitting in front of me. This was definitely Ms. Hill. And it's a different kind of interaction. But I will say that Ms. Hill is as genius as ever. Like, you know, there are parts of that interview that I see still 10 years later being circulated all over social media, like her quotes from it.
Yeah, because it's not a lot of sit downs that you can pull quotes from.
Right. And, you know, she said some things that were really genius, but I definitely... Getting to the interview part was definitely a struggle.
Did you try to reach out to her for this book, at least like make the attempt?
Nope. It was actually the one stipulation that I gave my editor was that I didn't want to be required to reach out to her, because I was like, I'm either going to write an authorized bio with her input, or I'm going to focus it strictly on the album. And I felt like even one quote from her would have made the reader, it would change everything. The reader's going to know, well, why didn't she talk about this? Why aren't you talking about that? And when you only have 4 months to write something, I didn't know how long it was going to actually take me to sit down with her. So I was like, let me just keep it clean and we'll focus on the album, because I think a book with her voice is another kind of project.
Now, this is definitely a classic album. And in the book, I noticed Dream Hampton, right, does not think.
Dreamy Fresh. What up, Dream?
Dream Hampton does not think that The Miseducation of Lauryn Hill was a great album.
Right.
And she talks about it. She didn't like Zion. You guys talk about that in the book and how she's off key when she's singing it. The production wasn't so great.
I wish I could have had Dream sing.
Cause the joy of my world.
I wish I could have shared that with yeah, it's not her favorite moment at all.
I can see why she would say that. I can see that, Dream.
So what do you think about that? Like, obviously, any album is going to have people that love it and people that feel like it's not up to the hype that people made it out to be.
What I loved about Dream's criticism of it is that it really makes us reflect back on our responsibility, you know? So what she's actually saying about it is that she doesn't think the production is that strong. That's my language. She's probably a little harsher about it. But she's also saying there's no way on that album that we should have crowned her the next Nina Simone. You know, she's saying that we should have given her several albums before we started giving her titles that would have been impossible to live up to. And when I think about the album, and actually when I introduce most people about the album that I talk to, they treat it like this friend that you were really cool with in high school or in college and you have great memories with, and when you sit down and you see each other, it's all love. If you see each other while you're out, it's all good. But the album wasn't an everyday part of their life. Like, they weren't sitting and listening from the album to the album from beginning to end. And they had a couple of tracks that they loved and went back to, but it wasn't as if like it was an embrace of the entire album all the time. And I think it's probably speaks a little to what Dream was talking about, is that there's production-wise, there's an unevenness to it.
I have to revisit. I haven't revisited it in a long time, but I don't revisit because, like I said, my mother used to play X Factor all the time. X Factor is like the second song on the album, so it's like I can't.
Wait, Nothing Even Matters is on this album?
Yes.
That was my song. I still play that song to this day with D'Angelo.
Yeah, I'm never mad if I hear this album out at all.
That song, Everything Is Everything.
Yeah, I'm trying to think.
That's my joint too. Of course, I love X Factor.
Yeah, I'm trying to think during that time, was it I know it was a huge album.
Yes.
But were we saying it was a classic then? I don't remember.
Yes, we were.
Yes, we were.
We definitely were.
We absolutely
To this day, it's still a classic album. But part of it is the time that we were in. I think that we were also looking for something that was different from everything else that was out there, too.
Yeah, I mean, we were in a really hard time in hip-hop, you know? 96 is a really hard. We get great music in 96. We also lose Biggie and Tupac, and like within 6 months of each other. So she really felt to many people like the breath of fresh air, the solution, the I think that's where that she can save hip hop thing starts.
Because it's like a balance thing too. Because we have Lil' Kim, we have Foxy Brown,
absolutely.
We have Lauryn Hill. Right. And it's all just a difference in things.
And that's the thing that Dream actually hates about the album that's not really about her. It's about our response to it, because she hates that we positioned those rappers as like, a problem, hypersexual, whatever have you, and Lauryn as like the proper representation. So she has a real problem with that.
Some people felt like it was preachy.
Yes.
Like they will say songs like Doo-Wop was a preachy type of song.
Well, when you talk to millennials now who were not our age when this album came out, and they listen to it, they feel like one of the common criticisms was, I open the book with a quote from my goddaughter, she was about 12, 13 when it came out, and she feels like it was incredibly preachy, and that she doesn't listen to it now. And I was surprised in how many interviews I've done where the interviews a millennial, and they say to me, so what do you say to my generation who says they don't feel the same way about her? They feel like the album is preachy. They do focus on the fact that it's just one album. Is that enough to warrant all of the love and the position that she has? So there's a generational divide on that for sure.
That's why I struggle. You know, I put her. It's the same thing with with Andre 3000. Like everybody, like, oh, Andre one of the greatest MCs of all time. Like, you don't have a solo album. I feel like that with Lauryn. It's like when you talk about Lauryn being one of the greatest artists ever, she got one project, unless you want to count the Unplugged. So it's kind of hard. It's almost like you're doing a disservice to everybody who got catalog. You know?
I think catalog matters, and I also think what an album is able to do matters. And so what I've come to realize in doing this project is that it's really much more than just the music. Like that we love this album because of the way it helped shift the culture and what it opened. I mean, Lauryn really is Black Girl Magic before the hashtag.
You told the Paris Review, you said you felt like, and you talked about it a little, but you felt like Lauryn Hill shouldn't have been burdened with the task of being the first and only female hip-hop artist to go #1. I wonder if that has changed all of these years later, 20 years later, watching somebody like Cardi have 3 #1s. Does she feel like a relief not being the only person on the top of that hill?
Well, I'm from the Bronx, so Cardi's a relief. I love my Bronx girl. But I think that Cardi is a relief for me, and I think I'll speak for some other people. I'm obviously not talking for everybody. I think what we love about Cardi is that she's able to show up as her authentic self.
Yes.
Right.
She doesn't have to be the goddess or the priestess or the savior of anything. That basically who you hear on the record, who you see if your engagement with her is Love and Hip Hop originally or on Instagram, is consistent across the bar, and that she's able to win just being herself without the burden of like public opinion. To me, that's what's freeing.
Right.
True. I can see that.
And
the funny thing is, like, it's not like Lauryn asked for that, though.
No, she definitely
Yeah,
didn't.
she never came out like, I am the mother
I
goddess.
always looked at
queen.
the Miseducation as like her way of, because people were critical of the fact that it says that she wrote, produced, and did everything basically for herself for the album. But they'll say, oh, well, she can't. I remember Robert Glasper recently did an interview.
Yes.
Uh-oh.
No, it's just that it comes up for me a lot.
Right. And when he talks about her, he's like, oh, well, she can't, go in the studio and do those things. And there were musicians and other people and things like that.
He accused her of stealing music.
But I do feel like for Lauryn, it was important because she wanted to show, like, I can do this as a woman and I don't need help from men. And
especially because, from my understanding, from my reporting in the book, is that there was an understanding in the group that they would all release solo projects. And Wyclef's came out, she worked on his, Praz's came out.
So you said she wrote for them.
Yeah, and so I feel like she also felt like, well, when is it supposed to be my turn? We understood that we would all release solo projects and all work with each other, and that never really happened. So I think that her doing the Miseducation is kind of her breaking away completely from the relationship and saying, forget it. If you're not going to support me this way, I'm going to do it myself. And I feel like it was important to her. I actually, I don't know. I really don't have an informed opinion about who exactly produced what. My sense is that, you go into a studio, you're doing things as friends, and none of us really want to think about the business aspect before we go into something with friends. But generally, when friends don't think about that in business, collaborations get messy later. So
she gave them like a bag of money, the producers, Newark Entertainment, and they did get credited on the album as well. But I guess they felt like it wasn't enough credit that they deserved.
Especially when they saw the way it was blowing up.
Right.
I mean, their lawyer's argument was that she won't be able to do this again because I know what my clients added to the process. But in fairness, they weren't able to do it again either. So
it was a mutual relationship that they needed each other.
Right, exactly.
Now, you said you hope Black women are able to exist between a spectrum of identities and experiences. So with the different representations of Black women at the forefront of entertainment and pop culture now, you think we're going in the right direction?
I absolutely do. I mean, when I think about, this is why I say with the Miseducation, you have to look at it more than just the actual album. I mean, when I look at like a Yara Shahidi or Amanla Stenberg, and I see these I see these incredible young women who are able to stand up for themselves. When I first wrote When Chicken Heads Come Home to Roost, to even call myself a my homegirls were like, you really want to make your first book about feminism? girl, you know black women are not checking for feminism like that. Write about something else. And to see these girls be able to comfortably identify at feminists as like 13 and advocate for themselves and be activists, I think that we have to really look back to where does that language building start? And it starts in the late 90s with people like Lauryn, you know, people like Kierna Mayo, who gave us Honey Magazine and allowed us to see ourselves.
Queen Latifah.
You know, I think that she's part of a really incredible genealogy that allows us to see where we are today. And, you know, I think that if she had had digital media, I mean, I think with that genius and that presence and that beauty, I don't know where, you know, she would have been able to take it.
Yeah, because it's like, you know, you talked about Yara just now, and it's like people like to do that now. They like to say, oh, look at Cardi B, look at Tiffany Haddish, this is what they prop up. But it's like, no, it's a lot of different representations out there.
Exactly. And why can't we love Cardi, love Tiffany, love Yara, love Amanda? Like, the beauty is the spectrum. It's not the beauty is not trying to find an ideal. It's the spectrum.
We all got a little Yara, a little Cardi in us, a little Tiffany in us.
Absolutely.
Even in the rap game, it's like they'll talk about Nicki, they'll talk about Cardi, but Rhapsody's right there. Tank is right there.
Absolutely.
Tokyo Jets is right there. Like, it's different variations and spectrums. All the good big words you just said. They're right there. But the book is out now, right?
Yeah.
She begat this. And my favorite Lauryn Hill line is always, why be a hard rock when you really are a gem, baby girl?
Oh, by the way, all of these kids that say that Lauryn's too preachy, it's a lot of tweetable bars in Miseducation and Lauryn Hill.
Absolutely. Go back and listen to it.
Yeah, it's funny how money changes situations, miscommunications leads to complications. Like, yeah,
for sure.
Well, thank you for coming.
Thank you for having
Yes, Joan Morgan,
me.
we appreciate you. You got to go back and read When Chicken Heads Come Home to Roost also at the same time that you go and get She Begat This.
I'm going to read that this weekend.
You know I'm like a Lauryn Hill. I told you I'm a anything Lauryn Hill involved, I'm always.
Because she went to school with her.
Yes.
Well, I have I have an affinity toward Lauryn Hill just because I knew her when we were teenagers.
She's putting out a book of Lauryn Hill notes that Lauryn Hill passed her in class. That's going to be her first book.
I'm not going to lie. I do have some notes that we passed each other in class where she would write rhymes and be like, how does this sound?
I would keep those too.
Yeah, I have them.
Wow. Well, it's Joan Morgan. It's The Breakfast Club. Thank you for coming.
Thank you.